So, officially, I'd like to welcome you to Petersburg National Battlefield. My name is Grant, and I want to go over a little bit of logistics of how we're kind of looking to about the walk, safety, and structure. As far as safety, the heat, not too bad actually. We've got a breeze, and I love shade, so I'm dedicated to shade. His tour, a lot of sun.
Better content, less sun.
So that's
Well, if your name is Grant, by any chance, is your name Lee?
No.
Okay.
yeah, there could be a wrestling match afterwards. So we're going to stick to the shade as best we can, even on Tracy tour, and I'll get to him in a moment about how he connects into this first walk. So if you're thirsty, that means you're already behind. So just keep hydrated, and I'm sure the folks at Fort Lee have that drilled into their heads, but the rest of us too. Just make sure about that. There is a water fountain nearby up there, if you can see it from here on the south side of the crater. If you decide to drink from there, it's fine. When you press the button, wait. It's a delayed response, so just wait about 10 seconds. The water is coming. So that's one source of water there. And if for any reason while we're taking this, while we're on the tour, whether it's mine now or Tracy's later, if you're feeling a little bit under weather or something, heat can sneak up on you. Okay, let somebody know. All right, but don't let the heat sneak up on you that way. As far as where we're going, so we are following a path. We're going to go down some steps, wooden steps, over some wooden bridges, across a mowed field. So we're going to be a little off terrain for a little bit, nothing too bad. Keep that in mind. So I think everybody's got pretty good footwear. Take your time going down the steps. This is not a rush. So I don't start talking till we're all back together again. So don't be thinking you're missing out on something. So just take your time going down the stairs and watch as we're going around across the terrain on that. After my program is done, my tour will end up at the crater at about 11 o'clock. Tracy Chernault, longtime ranger here, he leads the second tour a half hour later at 11:30. So we'll be talking about primarily the Union assault. He'll give the other half of the story about the Confederate defense here at the crater. So if you want to give people a little bit of a break, sit in your air-conditioned car, get some more water. Hopefully you will meet him at 11:30 up at the crater. That's where he starts his program, up there. And it'll also be about an hour presentation. So just kind of give you the structure of what we're looking at today. All right, any questions about that? And we got backup. Eric's here, so he's got his camera, so he can have an official record of how it all demised, how it all went down.
Hopefully it's not for a safety briefing later. What not to do in a program. So. Well, hopefully you don't mind. If you don't want your picture taken, just let me know. But I might just take a few pictures for social media, that kind of thing. We won't tag you.
We need evidence. That's okay. We got it.
Okay.
We need evidence.
All right. So many people, if they've heard about the Siege of Petersburg, has heard about this day, the Battle of the Crater. And by the end of it, I promise you several things. One is I promise you we'll have told you this much about the Battle of the Crater. And I hope that you pick up, and I hope what you see here between our two walks inspires you to continue exploring, not just this day, but the other 291 days here at Petersburg. And keep in mind, the stories that we talk about, the presentations that we're going to give here today is not someone else's story. It's not someone else's piece of ground. It is your piece of ground. And it doesn't matter when your family showed up, 1600s, 1970s, I don't care. As we walk across this ground, you own it, and it's part of our collective story here. So I really hope the bigger point that is that you come back and check out the rest of what you own and the rest of your story here. More particular to where we are at the moment, though, what I want to start off with is just asking you a simple question. No right or wrong. Is when I say the word home, what comes to your mind?
Family.
We had family? Family.
Where you grew up at?
Where you grew up at? Where you're from?
Security.
Security.
Foundation. Your own.
Yeah, created for yourself. That's something over here.
Foundation.
Foundation. And you mean it in what terms?
Foundations, like your family foundations is home. Like if we say I'm going home, the family.
Right.
That's where your foundation started at.
Gotcha.
Your great grandfather coming on up.
Yeah, it could be somewhere you've lived for multiple generations, right? Not just a home that you've created. We moved here back in 90, but we've been here since.
Yes, sir.
Go back foundation.
House.
The structure itself, right? What does it look like, the house? So you kind of take those notions. I bring them up because, and I'm not saying it's unique to where we're standing. I'm not saying it's unique to the war we're talking about. But I think part of the power of the place, I would say, to keep in mind, that's what's being fought over here. Our versions of home. All right. And we can say on this, ultimately, this battlefield officially, there's roughly 26,000 soldiers combined that will participate in the Battle of the Crater. And they have their own versions of what home means to them, and that's ultimately what they're fighting for. Because within home we have family, we have foundation, we have safety. If I walked into your house, I could probably tell a lot about what you view the world, how you know, about your views of the world. And those views are also values, right? So I'm not saying it's the only place here in America, or Civil War America, this occurs. I'm going to say it's one of the more powerful places that reminds us there's more than one side being fought here on this battlefield. It's not simply blue and gray. Right? You following with me on this one? People come up and say, Ranger, they don't use my name, but, make sure you tell the real story. The nudge, the wink.
Yeah.
And that's fine, that's what we do, right? We come in, I do it. I've got my own view of history. I've got my own understanding, and that's the understanding. I understand when people come up and tell me that. But if you really want to talk about the whole story, getting back to this notion of various views of home, and I don't want to be disingenuous or dishonorable about the sacrifice on the field today, 157 years ago, but at about 10 o'clock, we just stopped everything, got an old photographer out there, everybody got together, blue or gray. We all took a photograph of everybody who was here. Well, there's your whole story. And I'm sure it's going to be beyond everybody's slice of the pie here. Because when you look at that picture, what you're going to see are people who look like you and don't look like you. People who think like you in 19th century terms, perhaps, and don't think like you in 19th century terms. You will stare into the face of men wearing gray who, when they say they're fighting to defend their home, that is no metaphor, that's no illustrative point. They're from Petersburg. You're going to see guys who are white and Union, blue, and they're here because we're settling this out. The American Revolution wasn't fought so this country could be divided. And some of them will say, we didn't show up to make sure these fellow black Union troops come out as equals either. And then you will be looking into roughly 4,000 men who are black Union troops here. And to ask them what their version of home is. To ask them about their values. And not to overlook, there are a number of Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Chippewa Indians that are here in Union Blue. And there's even a handful of American Indians with the South Carolinians here. We'll get a little bit more into that, but I want to introduce you to that notion that this will not be an intellectual exercise of differences about what America ought to be after the war. You are looking at different visions of home and the expectations of what should be after this war. That's why I'm on this battlefield today. again, not the only place, but it's one of those rare places where we have such a spectrum of America on the same battlefield. We've all been armed. And after nearly 9 hours of fighting, it's going to come down to 45 minutes of hand-to-hand combat at the end of the day. And our colliding visions of America will be physically expressed on this battlefield. Okay? And if I could, I'd give you all copies of that photograph. We're going to pull it out a little bit later. Remind us of what we're talking about. And this is just a conversation. It's okay. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to like what I'm saying. I've got 3 20-year-old kids. I've been married for 30 plus years. I can live with a little bit of discourse. I'll go to bed tonight. I'll sleep. Okay? So, if you've got questions, you've got some ideas about things, bring them up as we go along. All right. Well, to get this started, right now we're in Farmer Griffith's wheat field. And what we got to do is understand, how did Farmer Griffith's wheat field turn into what we now know as the Battle of the Crater? So we're going to enter the woods. We're going to go down a few steps, over a couple bridges. We're going to then stop at the edge of the woods. So take it all in. And I'm not going to start talking again until we stop again. So I want you to just kind of take in the topography. One thing I will tell you right now, these trees are not here. I'll bring it up again about the landscape, just so you can think about it. These trees are not here. So we'll start getting into the landscape and understanding this transformation. Any questions at the moment? All right. Let's find out what awaits us down at Poor Creek.
Everybody.
All right, and I'm gonna leave it up to you, but we got shade here. If you want to, you stand where you've got to stand. So first, I want to use this map in front of you. So basically, to kind of give you an idea of where you are. If you have the text at the bottom, that means the north is up here. North is up this way. I don't know how everybody's holding it, but the text down here is south, and at top is north. Okay? So that's how you're facing right now. You're facing up. I'm going to call this a valley. You can have a topographical debate later, but I'm going to call this a valley. So we're in the valley right now at the moment. Off to your right, over the slight rise right here, you can see the wires. That's right along the railroad. Okay? It was there then as it is now. The cut itself is much more deeper and developed than it is now. It's kind of worn down. We can even see the tracks at certain points from here. But keep in mind, it's a fully developed, true railroad cut, you know, as part of the story. Then we come down through here. You can't tell right at the moment, but against this bluff, and we crossed over 2 branches of it to get here, it's Poor Creek. It flows ultimately northward and into the Appomattox River. It's not much bigger than what we're going to see or what you crossed over. It's not that big a stream. Up the bluff and over the hill, that's off Griffith's wheat field up there, his farm. On the other side of the rail tracks, you might have noticed the chimney. You can still see the top of it over there. That is part of the Taylor Plantation. It's called Spring Garden. And what remains of that, you'll see there, the chimney is the remains of the kitchen and part of the enslaved quarters. The house itself for the owners would be just north of there. So none of these lines. On the 18th, if we were standing here, it's the 4th day of initial attacks. The fighting started up near today's visitor center on the 15th, and basically the pattern has been the Confederates at the end of the 15th fell back about a mile or so, dug a new line, was holding on for a day, fell back again, on the 18th, early on the morning of the 18th, they fall back to a new position. That new position, which we'll see more later, is on top, part of it's on top of that hill. So they've lost 2 miles of their wall, they're falling back finally to this position, and they're redigging a new line from just south of here all the way back up towards the Appomattox River. That's what the Union have taken from them. They're still here because the Union armies have been arriving in piecemeal and hitting the Confederate line. They've never used the full weight of their numbers against the Confederate line. And that's why Beauregard, the Confederate commander at this point, is able to hold on. And ultimately, as you will learn, by the end of the 18th, he will have secured the city still. It'll still be in Confederate hands. Are you hot yet?
Nope.
I'm glad. I'm glad it wasn't a cool breeze down here and it was a nice 70, because then you'd be disappointed about the experience. This is pretty much along the weather these guys are going through. So, June 17th, by June 18th, in the morning of June 18th, and this piece of ground that we're standing on, up to our left and out of sight at the moment would be South Carolinians. They are still digging. They are using shovels. Anything they've got, and they're digging the new line the engineers have laid out. There's Virginians to the south of them, North Carolinians to the north of them. They've got a 4-gun battery up there. So they're keeping an eye on things down here. And on the morning of June 18th, they see a section of the Union Army come over the hill and start making their way down it. The intensity of fire from up that hill, the distance is not that great. All right, from where the crater was fought to about where that chimney is only about 800 yards. So the rifle fire, and you can see down in here, was so intense that some of the Union attempts to come down in here and sweep up the hillside were stopped cold and kept them in the rail cut itself. So Union forces have spent the morning just fighting their way into the rail cut. They talk about just to climb up the wall to look over that position would invite being shot off of it. That's how intense this is. And for a while, up the rail cut, they had Confederate fire coming down it from the north until they finally built enough barricades to stop that enfilading fire. So these are indications this will be no swift rushing through this valley and up that hill. Delayed commands, no uncooperation. Remember, so we have Grant and then we have George Meade, who's really in charge of the Union forces here. He is the direct commander of the guys in charge of these Union troops. And Meade is becoming frustrated with his subordinates about getting this job done. He wanted a complete one push in the morning. That devolved into a series of uncoordinated attacks like the one we just saw trying to get into the rail cut. There's been a pause, and he wants it to happen again about 4 o'clock, and that will fall apart. Standing where we are, it'll be at 5:30. Finally, Union troops that are already here in the rail cut will finally come out of the rail cut in force and sweep towards Poor Creek. There are Confederate pickets down along Poor Creek, and this front extends up into those woods too. That's not just the opening that we have in front of us. And so you would witness about 5:30, Union troops coming out of the cut, sweeping down the hill across these flats. Initially, these pickets offer some resistance, but quickly they're going to scamper up the heights and back to the main line. About 1,000 Federal troops are able to climb the heights, get up towards the line. But as one South Carolinian will observe later, their line erupted in a sheet of flame and stopped them cold from reaching the lines. In this push across this small open flat and up this hill, this place becomes quickly littered, and I don't mean that in any dishonorable way, men in blue. We have accounts of Poor Creek running red. We have accounts of hapless, is the term, wounded Union troops in the creek. 1 or 2 incidences of hapless Union wounded with dead comrades on top of them drowning. In fact, Colonel Bolton of the 51st Pennsylvania, who will get up there and will help secure the line, as we will learn, will note that he had come back down at one point to get water from the creek when he had noticed that there was the flag of the 2nd Michigan floating down it. And that image has always stuck with me about the price paid. we often don't talk about when we do crater programs, and this is such a, and as far as time elapsed, a small portion of the fight. But you know, that's why you travel battlefields, that's why you walk the ground that's sacred. You realize feet are paid for. And that's how this footage was paid for on June 18th. They will push up that hill, they will get shy of the line, and they start digging in. As the sun goes down, you will have the Union troops up on top of the hill digging in, and we'll get a view of that in a moment. You'll have Union troops starting to dig back up on the other side of the railroad, trenches to get up, and that'll become their main line. That ridge up there where the chimney is, they'll start digging in. So June 18th, prices paid by the Union as well as the South Carolinians, and this is what leads eventually to what we now know as the Battle of the Crater. To get an idea of how this is better developed and take a look at the initial and how this battle starts, we're going to go up this hill. I was there yesterday. There should be shade up there. We're going to go up that hill to get a better view, and then we're going to come back down this way. Okay? As we do walk, you will notice grass has grown over wooden pallets. So you can walk on that. They offer pretty good. If you're kind of don't want to do that, you can step off to the side. The pallets are only so wide. They're there for us to get up and down with our machinery. So just so you know, as we're walking along, I want to make sure we have a safe walk up there. Okay? Let's get back to the map and kind of give you a fix of where you are at this very moment, approximately. So you see Baxter Road running at the base of the map?
Yep.
As it gets to the right end of your map, you'll see right before it crosses the track, you'll see something that says Federal. There's a covered way, it's a little squiggly line. We're kind of right in there on this knoll. And like I promised you, this gives you a great view from the Union perspective of the battlefield. Up top to your left, if you can make out the collection of trees, if you saw the gray obelisk, a piece of it, that monument over there, and the split rail fence, that's Elliott's Salient. That'll become the site of the Battle of the Crater. Coming back towards you from that, you'll see an open field. Then if you can make out that patch of grass that's not cut, that is the new Federal line. That is the new Union line out there. That's their advanced position. That those soldiers who paid the price going up over that bluff on June 18th started digging in. That's the forward line. There's 400 feet between that line and the main Confederate line in the middle of a wheat field. Coming back towards us, along this wood line, coming down the hill towards Poor Creek, is a southern covered way. The covered way is a large trench for communication, moving a lot of troops at once. It might have planking, and it's not always covered either, but it's just a term that was stuck to that type of entrenchment, and that will be referenced later. But there's a southern covered way, as we call it, and then just up a little bit, it's kind of hard to ascertain from here, there's a depression, but a northern covered way is also going to be used during the battle to move Union troops in for the fight. Oh, this is open, and gentlemen, it has to be, if we're kind of original terrain, as far as the role and lay of the land, yes. It was farmed afterwards. There was a golf course built around the crater at one point, but it didn't dramatically change the nature of the terrain here. Yes, sir.
So why was this area important in terms of strategically? Why did it need to be defended, and why did they want to take it? Like, what was the importance of it?
Well, it becomes important because the Confederates have decided to create a defense. They've replaced the defensive wall they lost, and that's where it runs. So as far as the Union go, they've run up against it. So the Confederates have chosen a high ground, that is a hill over there, and it's part of the line that they built to hook up to their old line around the city. As far as why the Union, that's part of the rationale that soon, by June 23rd, 4th, answers your question. So we'll get to that in a moment, why it becomes more important from the Union perspective, but it boils down to a lot the fact there's only 400 feet between the two lines, and it's the closest the two lines are at this point, what is becoming the siege. So we have that, we got that, we're down here in the valley, so this becomes a rear area, and we'll talk about that. So we are good on location and orientation to where we are?
Got a question.
Yes.
You were saying up there that there were no trees there.
Right.
How much trees were around this area, or was this pretty much? How far did the fields go?
These trees are not here behind you. There are not that many trees in front of you. As we get to our next stop, which will be on the other side of this field, on the north side, and there will be some trees down there in the flats. There'll be copses of trees, groups of trees, but it's still very much fairly open.
So it's mainly open farmland out here.
Correct, correct. In fact, there is crops that are grown down here too at one point.
When was the railroad put in? Was it here?
Yeah, predates the Civil War.
Okay.
And the rail bed itself, the rail that you can see now, remember that cut I was telling you about, how it wasn't this way? The rail bed predates the war. But it's the same basic location for the rail as it is today. All right. So, far as the building of it, so we got the understanding of the lines. The line itself arcs. So what you see on the hill is the furthest, it's closest to the Confederates. As it heads northward into today's wood line, it starts to arc back, and we'll catch up with that at our next stop. To your left or to the south, it arcs again back across the creek and back towards the main Union line. This will become known as the horseshoe to the Union soldiers here. So it kind of gives you the idea of how it sticks out, bulges out, and where they are, and in a pretty well exposed area. But don't think that line out there that they built is some 4-foot high piece of earth that everybody's just laying on their belly behind. As time goes on, and by the Battle of the Crater, and it influences how the battle unfolds, we have drawings just before the battle. They have dug that line on that far hill so deep that you can comfortably stand up behind it. You'll have to step up to shoot over the sandbags at the Confederates. That there are pitched tents behind it. Okay, so that is an intense front line they've created. So as this progresses, so very often, as they're creating this landscape, it's not a week, it's not 5 days. Within a few days after June 18th, as the Union are digging in, creating this forward defensive line, very quickly, right? We're soldiers. It didn't take us long to figure out how miserable this place is going to be. We're at point blank range in the middle of a wheat field, and we're both digging in. How long do you think we're going to be here doing this? That the men up there start talking, and very quickly they come up with the idea that since we're so close, that wouldn't it be nice if we could build a tunnel underneath the Confederate position over there? Pack it full of black powder, blow up the Confederate position, do not go in the crater, go around the crater, and seize the heights. With these trees not here, you can see Blandford Cemetery. Blandford Church itself, which is there today, you can go visit it, sits on the last heights above the town. The plan was to get to Blandford Cemetery Heights, get artillery up there so you can own Petersburg. And if you own Petersburg, what else do you own? Richmond. Remember, Petersburg is the central supply hub for Richmond. That's what brought the armies here ultimately. So the early accounts call this the Battle for Cemetery Hill, not the Battle of the Crater. So that's the plan. They pass it on up the food chain. If you're not familiar with Civil War armies, I don't care blue or gray, and I don't care what part of the country you're in, are made up of things called corps. And the Union like to number their corps, and they don't repeat numbers. General Burnside is in charge of the 9th Corps. And it's the 9th Corps that sits here. It's the 9th Corps that's come up with this idea. Burnside hears the idea, likes the idea, and he goes to George Meade. And as officers you might be well aware of, and parents might be well aware of, just being as human beings, talking to other human beings we might be well aware of. You can have everything going right, but if the communication or personalities aren't mixing, you're in a whole lot of trouble sometimes. Burnside and Meade don't like each other all that much. Burnside walks in, tells him this plan. Meade, and don't go back and say, this is a quote. It is not a quote. It is not a quote. But I would paraphrase Meade's response to Burnside. You know what's going to keep you busy and out of my hair? Knock yourself out. I'll back that up by the fact that when the word trickles back down to these 300 guys from Pennsylvania who came up with the idea, it's not like they turned around and, wow, look at all these engineers. Wow, look at all these pioneers. Wow, thanks for all this. The only thing that came back down was, good luck. 300 guys from Pennsylvania start digging that tunnel. They're not all miners, but enough of them are that after this program or after today, we're not going to stop there right at this on this program. But go down and check it out. The facade we have is to the original dimensions. You know, miners built it. They built it, and within 3.5 weeks, they have completed a 511-foot tunnel that at that time was the longest in military history. And at the end of that tunnel, underneath the Confederate position, they built 2 galleries, small hallways, if you will. Off that, they built rooms, magazines. They asked for 4 tons, 8 tons, they only get 4 tons. They asked for a nice, long, modern 1860 fuse. They get chunks of old stuff they got to splice together. But they're done. On July 27, they are done. And they come back and tell Burnside, you better go soon before the powder gets wet. Burnside has not been sitting around. For 3.5 weeks, he takes a look at his corps. He's got 16,000 men in his corps. And corps are broken up into divisions, and he has 4 of them. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, we love our numbers, and the 4th. The first 3 divisions are all white divisions. The 4th division is a black division. Got to pause here for a moment. When we say a black division, that means all the privates and non-commissioned officers are black. Uncle Sam is not going to have a commissioned officer in his army. That's black. You kind of pause here for a moment. You take a look and go, we had plenty African Americans who wanted to volunteer right after the first shots in 1861. And it's not until 1863 that Uncle Sam says, fine, we'll take you on. And now that we're wearing Union blue, if we're part of that 4th division, you know, we know full well that these white guys in Union uniform are not a bunch of army abolitionists, right? Not everybody signed up when the war broke out to make African Americans equal in the United States. And even in the reports, so these white officers who command these black troops, not all of them are abolitionists, not all of them are for the greater cause. Some become that way after serving alongside these men, start to realize they're just as brave, they fight just as hard, they'll die just like the rest of us. But you can see in the reports here at the Siege of Petersburg, they start to complain. My guys are doing grunt work that everybody knew full well that if you were a white guy in a blue uniform, you'd be doing as punishment. My guys are broken up doing certain things. We haven't got the training. Our weapons are not up to par. So it's sort of the second-class status within the Union Army even. And that comes to bear. Remember there's different visions at home? What America should be after the war? It'll bear out amongst the Union troops. So the division was formed early of '64. They hadn't seen a lot of fighting, not because they could, not because they wouldn't. They just had not been given the chance primarily. And now if you're one of those 4,000 men, you have a chance to have a gun in your hand, to be on a battlefield, and fight for what you believe in. Pretty powerful. We have accounts of officers reflecting about how these men who are training come up with their own songs, come up with ways to express, to look forward to going to battle, however much you could look forward to going into battle. So when these men arrive finally on July 30th, they're going to arrive with a passion. They will not be quiet about how they think these things should go down on July 30th. So he's picked the 4th Division to be the lead assault troops. They haven't, like I said, hadn't seen much service yet. He felt they're fresher, you got a better morale amongst them. So for 3.5 weeks, they're supposed to have been trained. This will be no easy feat. Burnside picks 3:30 in the morning. It's dark, right? Let's say to be redundantly obvious. It's dark. We're going to set off 4 tons of black powder. We have no idea what that's going to look like. And the other plan is after that goes off, with 100+ guns hitting Confederate batteries, they're going to pelt this place. And then we're going to send 4,000 guys through the darkness to go across the ground, split in half. One pushes a group to the south, if they can push the Confederates southward along their lines. One will go to the north and do the same to Confederates north of the line, so that the other 3 white divisions can pour through and go to the Cemetery Heights. That is no easy feat. So the training goes on for that. Do you think the Confederates have no idea what's going on?
They know.
Oh, they know. In a couple of days, a couple of Virginia soldiers came across the line, not just to spare the news, but they had come across the line because they had other things they wanted to be doing. And they tell them, yeah, pretty much. And it's in a great account. A guy named Edward Alexander, he's a chief artillerist here at Petersburg, writes a great book after the war. And he's right there during this time period. And once the Confederates realized what was going on, they too sink wells. They too dig mines. There's about 10 feet deep. The Union are about 20 feet deep. So it's a cat and mouse game for 3.5 weeks. So obviously they never found them. But the bottom line is the Confederates were aware of this on the situation. So, oh, I got some quotes here for you. So on July 30th, 3:30 is the designated time. And at 3:15, back over the mine entrance, and I'll just give you a quick reference. You see where that sign is in a little bit of walkway and there's 3 posts right next to it? Can you see over there? You have to kind of on the ridge. If you followed it to your right, down the hill and out of view, that's where the mine entrance is. Over there at 3:15, figuring if spark would take 15 minutes to traverse the full length of the fuse, they've lit it already. They've lit the fuse already. And counting on that spark taking that much time, everybody over here, the 9th Corps with their 16,000 men, they're up on a plain up there, most of them are. Some are, another section, other divisions off to our left. Another division are in the woods to the right. We'll catch up with them at our next stop. We're all waiting. Those 100 guns are waiting. And at 3:30, and then at 4 o'clock, then at 4:30, 2 guys go in, find out there's a problem, resolve the problem, relight the fuse, and send the fuse spark on its way. And that's why at 4:45, just about, on the morning of July 30th, this place erupts. Just before all that, just to kind of give you a sense of where these soldiers, just one account, you can find many have different things to it. Private Reuben Morris of the 2nd Michigan, he's 16 years old and it's his first battle he's been in. So about 4 o'clock in the morning of July 29th, the night before, every man received 4 days' rations, 60 rounds of cartridges, and told to strike back and be ready to march by dark. So they were not all here. They had to get lined up. We started at 8 o'clock on the night of the 29th, all loud talking, rattling of firearms, strictly prohibited, and to march as quietly as possible to keep the rebels from noticing anything unusual. So he's trying to get 16,000 men lined up behind these lines under the cover of darkness. We arrived at the Horseshoe about midnight, took our place in the second line of battle, boiled some coffee, ate our supper, and then laid ourselves down to sleep, wondering who would bite the dust before another night. That's quite a conversation to be had. We were roused up and the next morning, had our breakfast, ordered to put on our knapsacks in a pile so we would have nothing to impede our movements. 40 extra rounds of cartridges given us, then moved toward a ravine about a quarter mile from the first line of battle. So they're back in here. Not everybody can fit up behind that line on the hill. All at once we saw a great cloud of earth and smoke rise up about 200 feet in the air, seeming to hang there for a moment. Then as it began to settle came the crack, and at the same moment 200 cannon opened their iron mouths and sent their missiles of death into the rebel line. It was an earthquake. The ground shook so hard we could hardly stand. And one more other about the explosion. A soldier from the 31st Maine, a huge roar. You have to imagine that hilltop disappearing. A huge roar as if from the bowels of earth belched forth, and the occupants of the fated fort started heavenward. 280 South Carolinians will go up in this explosion. Earth, stones, timbers, arms, legs, guns unlimbered, and bodies unlimbed, amid clouds of dust and smoke, ascended in a fearful confusion and havoc. It was a spectacle never to be forgotten. And then it's to the hill. You might notice something though. If we could peer through the darkness right now and span the men on the hill who are going forward at this moment after the artillery, after the explosion, after the artillery barrage, The 4th Division is not amongst them. 11 o'clock that night before, as Morris is making his way here, he's not quite here yet, at 11 o'clock that evening on July 29th, Burnside is told the 4th Division is not going first. Your best trained guys are going to be waiting. They're not going to be right behind the other 3 divisions. They're going to be sitting back for a while. Why? You could say anything. Meade could talk about how, in fact, if this turns out poorly and we sent those United States Colored Troops, they're called, USCTs back then, if we sent those USCTs in and they get slaughtered, it would look like we just fed them to be killed. Meade doesn't have faith in them. They're fresh troops. Doesn't care about they're not veterans. There's also a question about how Meade views black troops. But your bottom line against Burnside's protestations, they are back behind you right now across the railroad in a covered way. The other 3 divisions are up on the hill. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd divisions all go at once at the crater. The 1st Division and the 1st Division's in the center. The 2nd Division to our right go up and get tangled in the crater itself. The 3rd Division is on the south end and pushes past today's tour road and bathroom over there. They're over there by 6 o'clock. It's not until 7:30 that the USCTs come forward. Pause for a moment. The 3rd Division that crossed over here to the south end of the crater and then went southward, rushing through there, if you were looking closely, if we were standing there as they were rushing by us, we would notice men, Native Americans, Ojibwa, Ottawa. They're with the Michigan 1st Sharpshooters. They're with the 38th Wisconsin. You pause for a moment, right? What are they doing here? They're not citizens. They've got no voting rights. They can't own property in the U.S. At the same time the Civil War is going on, Uncle Sam is waging war against American Indians out west. So why do we have these men from Michigan and Wisconsin on this field? What do they hope to get? And you can't trust any group of people as a monolith, right? Some of those guys will. We have writings talk about, I'm here because I believe. I'm patriotic. I believe in this cause. And a lot of guys are also saying, if we do well here, maybe the federal government will actually start respecting us. Those people, and it's not just reserved to those tribes of Michigan and Wisconsin, but in that area have had treaty after treaty with the U.S. and have been broken time and time again. And they have ceded millions of acres of land to the U.S. government. And it may not be your people, your nation, under attack right now in Michigan or Wisconsin. Don't mind, they're not being treated as equals. It may be out west they're being physically and violently attacked, but still against the same portion of America. And you think their view of America is the same as the USCTs? Could be on the same par, but they probably have different views, right? Outlooks. And is it the same as Private Morse? I'm not going to hang it on Morse, but I'm going to use him as an example. You think Morse has the same values as the USCTs and those Native Americans. But they're all rushing up that hill together. Just keep that in mind. Okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to follow those troops over to the other side of this field. I promise you we'll still be in shade. I might be introducing bugs over there just to add to your happiness. Appreciate you hanging in here with me because I want to try to combine 2 stops together. I usually don't sit here this long. The other stop is going to be out in pure sun, so we're going to stay here, okay? But I want you to think about the vision. 3 divisions have gone forward, and those USCTs, let me catch you up with those guys. They've been up since 3. They saw the explosion. They've heard the fighting, and here they sit. And then it's 6 o'clock, and then it's 7 o'clock. And 7:30, they're finally giving the word in. But for those 2 hours before the attack, they're in a covered way. Remember being a large, wide trench? They're to one side, they talk about. We are sitting to one side of this large, wide trench. 4,000 of us are to one side. And we're to one side because for the last 2 hours, we have watched the dead, dying, and wounded being hauled by us. You're going to spend 2 hours before you go in there watching what's coming out of there. That's their lead into this. But at 7:30, they're finally given the forward. They'll come out. They're going to go up the southern covered way along this wood line on the opposing side of the creek. They will not go into the crater. Part of their training, they will swing west, they swing north and east of the crater and start sweeping up the Confederate lines. So keep that in mind. We're going to rejoin all that. We're going to go back down the hill. Just take our time. We're going to get on that mowed path. We're going to cross over a small footbridge, and then the other bridge you see on the far side, that's one we're going over. And then we're going to go into the wood line there along Poor Creek and stop and find out what happens there. Any thoughts right now or comments? Okay. So we're going to put our glasses on, what we're going to do. So I can see what I'm doing here. We've just crossed over. So again, if we got the map arranged this way, and this right here is outlining Poor Creek, and we're right about in here. We're right about in this area here. We crossed the creek, and we're just inside the Union line. Okay. So down in these flats right now, give you an idea. This is still open down this way. The line, the Union advance line came down off the hill and is wrapping back across the creek now. We're at the northern end of this. This is all open down through here. There are some trees up. If you threw these trees, you would see the ridge continues in front of us. It's not a solid ridge, but there's some hills in front of us. In a section of the Union Army down here, there's a division's worth that's on loan from somewhere else. We're not going to get too in the weeds on this. They're down here from the 10th Corps. And so they're waiting. And they've heard the explosion. And they're still waiting in the flats. And they've seen the fighting develop. And then they see those USCTs who have swept north of the crater and are now pushing up the line. Remember how I told you they're going to arrive with a passion on the battlefield? And they're not going to keep it to themselves. They arrive screaming that the black flag is up, that there'll be no quarter given to the Confederates. And they're also screaming Fort Pillow, remember Fort Pillow. And to them, it's about an event that happened out west earlier in the war, earlier that year, where after the battle had taken place, Confederate troops had shot down unarmed black soldiers. Mm-hmm. They use that as a rallying cry. They show up, and as they're scooping up Confederate flags and prisoners, we have two accounts of them bayoneting Confederate prisoners. The passion of it all. 10th Corps guys down here are watching that, and as the Union troops, as black troops, will push up the line about 250 yards north of the crater. They'll be, as a division, the one that gets closest to the objective. These guys will cross the creek. Now, they've been taking fire. They said this is open, and they've been receiving fire from the North Carolinians north of the crater. They're still in their lines and still have their artillery. So they've still been taking some pounding here. Guys would be dropping around here. But finally, they cross the creek, go up the hill, and are lining up. So they're just down the ridge. USCTs are on top of the ridge in the Confederate lines. They're trying to move forward. These guys are going to come up the hill to support. They arrived just after the black Union troops had tried once and failed under intense Confederate artillery rounds and rifle fire from the surviving South Carolinians. They will gather twice, second time, and fail. They're gathering a third time when the Confederate reinforcements hit them. I'm going to let Tracy tell those details to you. I hope you can join him on his tour. The bottom line is, after nearly 20 minutes of hand-to-hand combat in those trenches, the the 4th Division begins to break. Some of the soldiers will go southward back to the crater. Others will come streaming back down this ridge, heading towards this creek. And as those men are retreating out of the trench lines and back down the ridge, they are doing so just as the 10th Corps has arrived to support. So now we have this wave of men coming down the hill with their bayonets on their guns, not intending to, but they talk about some of them getting nicked and hit by bayonets, some of them being swept. They literally sweep the 10th Corps back down the hill. But some of those 10th Corps guys, they're pissed. And all they see is black Union troops heading back down the hill. And there are accounts in that movement, that collapse of the Union position, of some of these white Union troops either bayoneting or shooting down black Union troops. We talked about home, right? We talked about values. We talked about what your house looks like. You know, home is just another word for freedom, right? How do you guys define freedom? No right or wrong answer. We all got our personal definitions. But some key things to you when I say freedom, when it comes to your minds.
Democracy.
Democracy.
To be able to pursue your dreams that you have.
Right, to pursue happiness, as Thomas Jefferson put in there, but pursue your dreams. Right.
Religious choice.
Yeah. Connect with the world around you as you choose to. The funny thing is, nobody's wrong, right? And for the most part, we kind of be on the same page. And we're here as a country because we wrote that into a constitution, and we wrote that in the Declaration of Independence, and we've still been trying to sort that out. And this is one of the more powerful places I think it comes to the surface that reminds us. You know, we can all agree on democracy. We can all agree on pursuit of dreams. We can agree on the right to connect to the spiritual world as we wish. But you can tell we have different ideas of how that's supposed to all come together. So yeah, we talked about home, but we're really talking about, I think, is what does freedom mean to us? There wasn't a discussion being had on that ridge. There wasn't a discussion between the Confederate troops, as you'll learn from Tracy, and those black troops up on that ridge. And there's not a discussion between the 10th Corps and the retreating 4th Division. So like I said, they'll come back down through this valley. And they're not the only ones who've come back down through this valley who've had enough of this fight. Keep in mind, as we go and continue and you learn more about on this side of the fight, that this valley down here will become a place of men springboarding for the attack, men seeking refuge from the fight. You will see men come down here to the next till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, filling up canteens and going back up to the fight, filling them up in Poor Creek, picking up ammunition where they can find it and going back to the hole. So this hasn't become a quiet reserved spot back here. The shells are still flying from the Union position near the chimney over there on that far ridge. Outgoing and incoming Confederate artillery is still raining over the top of this valley, as well as the bullets flying over top of it. So as we witness the collapse of the position up there, north of the crater, we've watched the division from the 10th Corps being also swept down here. At our next stop and our last stop, we're going to be up at the crater to take a closer look at this final collapse. The 4th Division north of the crater. And now, by 10 o'clock in the morning, they have learned that the 9th Corps will have no more support for the attack. So from about 10 o'clock on until the battle is over around 2:30, these men are on their own. That's probably why I was referencing guys running back to get water, guys running back to get ammunition. Those sort of things are happening. And to get from here back to the Union line, you have to do it under fire. So you usually walk back that way. Under successive Confederate counterattacks, the Union president is shrunk. And by the final Confederate assault to retake the crater by about 1:30, at this point, anybody wearing Union blue is in the hole. Okay, I hope you understand they weren't that way the whole day. But at this point, that's the case. It's Alabamians that come across last. They're going to come, they've made it to the south end of the crater. They're starting to shoot down into it. We have Virginian, Georgian, North Carolinian troops joining in and going into the hole as well. And for 30 minutes we have, well, basically, I'm not trying to take Tracy's story away, but for 45 minutes we're basically down to hand-to-hand combat. And I hate the word crater, I call it a pit. It's too big when you think of a crater. Jammed together tight, guys going down, not right away. If you are at the bottom of it, the fight's going to continue on top of you. Some of these white Union troops, when they saw the Alabamians coming across, realized if I'm not if I'm not killed by the time these guys retake this crater, and I'm captured fighting beside black Union troops, what's going to happen to me? We have one or two accounts of white Union soldiers shooting down black Union soldiers in the crater. Also, when those Alabamians arrive, and the Confederates have now secured this, yeah, those Confederates arrived, they heard that there'd be no mercy shown. The black flag was up. In some of his accounts, not all these Confederate soldiers, some will be taken aback by what they witnessed, but you do have accounts of Confederates going through and shooting down soldiers after the battle, black soldiers after the battle is over. That's what I mean, this is not an intellectual exercise. And to a bigger point, remember those copies I gave you of the photo we took at 10 o'clock in the morning here? You know, I hope the next time you come out to here, or to really any battlefield or any place, you know, you might want to bring that with you and pull it out and just remind yourself, especially at the crater, it's not a matter of blue and gray. I believe when you pull out that, and if you really want to take a look at the full story, if you really want to account for everybody who's here and ask them why, you know, what home are you trying to protect? What freedom are you fighting for? You start to realize there's more than just two sides to this. And it's where I believe the power of the place comes from, here out of the crater. All right. Well, I thank you for making the trek with me. This is my first take on it, so you'll forgive me for 15 minutes, right? And if you'd like to continue, I know Tracy's not going to start. If you got to get to the restroom, somebody inquired about that. That's just over across the parking lot. If you want to refill at the water fountain I mentioned, this is just yards from where you're standing, do so, and Tracy will wait for you. And,
Sure.
Well, we're always waiting on Tracy, so I think he could do that for you. He'll meet you here, and he'll begin the other side of the story here at the Battle of the Crater.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before you take off, I'd just like to say
It's like
one
respect.
thing. This is a historic moment that you're participating in as well. I mean, not only is it the 157th anniversary, but Grant and I have been doing these anniversary programs now for more than 20 years.
Easily.
And this is probably, unless we can coerce him to come back, his last anniversary. So he's much older than me. So
You mean smarter.
so
Grant's the one who weed whacked our trail.
that's right.
Nice.
So an extra special thanks to Grant for his friendship and his service.
Thanks, Trace. Then you said charge. Yada yada yada.
Exactly.
That's right.
Taking a break.
I said so long she's here.
So the sign-in sheet's not till the end of the program.
No signing sheet. I say no signing sheet. He said check out with the boss.
Oh, there you go. Well, for those of you that weren't on this morning's program, you guys just arriving here with us. So this is kind of the response to the earlier program, which you have an opportunity to catch later today as well if you want to, because it'll begin again. But we're going to end up going through this side of the battlefield versus where some of these folks just slogged through the other side of the battlefield. But we'll cover some of the information. You won't be completely lost by things that they learned this morning, because I'm going to try and catch you up somewhat as we go through here. So for those of you that are just joining us, and those of you that have been with us for a while this morning, I would like to personally welcome you to Petersburg National Battlefield on a special day, being the 157th anniversary of the events that take place here. My name is Tracy, and unlike Grant, I don't have a famous name to fall back on. My sister named me for Dick Tracy, but nobody cares about that on a Civil War battlefield. But other than that, you find yourselves out here, again, as we were just talking about a little bit for those of you that were up here, we were talking about how
this area has completely changed. And you saw, if you went on the walk this morning, some of the changes that would have been here on the battlefield. And we talked about home, and we talked about different things. Here I'd like to also introduce the concepts of, everybody's individual idea of, what is courage and what is leadership? And how do those things fall into place when you visit somewhere like this and you are seeing somewhere that history took place? And fortunately for us, so many men that are here write about it and talk about it afterwards, so we get a better sense of what it would have been like for some of these guys. But just like everything else, individual stories are all just that, individual stories. And everybody's background or what they had been through in life all adds to their experience and how they're going to talk about these things as well. You find yourself here on this hillside, literally between two farms at the time of the Civil War. From the Taylor farm that would have been across the railroad over there on the hill beyond, to the Griffith farm and the G farm houses, which would have been out close to that road today, which all of you will see will be Crater Road, named for the battle that takes place here. At the time, it was called the Jerusalem Plank Road, because Jerusalem was a small town a little more than 30 miles down in southern Virginia, down next to the North Carolina border. And so the Jerusalem Plank Road had been built to bring tobacco and other farming things into Petersburg. Because Petersburg, if you didn't have those trees right across there behind you or over to your left, you'd be looking at a cemetery that overlooks downtown Petersburg. So when Union soldiers fight in this battle and they talk about trying to gain Cemetery Hill, that's where they're trying to go, because that hill overlooks downtown Petersburg. So whoever controls that hill controls the fate of the city of Petersburg. Because if the Union Army can get cannons on that hillside, they could shell Petersburg into submission. Now, what's so important that you would fight here at Petersburg over, like these soldiers end up doing? Petersburg's a city of about 18,000 people. And of those 18,000 people, they all make a living here, and a lot of them make their living in industry. And prior to the Civil War, when transportation is all evolving and changing, 5 railroads had been built that all converge here in this city of Petersburg. So when this war begins, now all of a sudden, those 5 railroads are vital to the Confederate States Army. The capital of the Confederacy is just 25 miles north of us at Richmond, and there's a railroad that runs from Petersburg right up there to the Confederate capital. And so supplies can literally be brought from around the world into Petersburg and then funneled right up to the Confederate capital, instantly making it a target for any kind of attack that the United States Army wanted to make here. The fighting doesn't start right here where we are. When you came off of the highway over off of Route 36 and you were at the visitor center at stop 1 on this tour, you were at the site of where the opening assaults took place. The Confederates, knowing the importance of Petersburg, had built a 10-mile line of entrenchments that started at the Appomattox River here east of town and goes all the way around Petersburg to the Appomattox River over on the western side of town. And along that 10 miles of fortifications, they had built 55 artillery emplacements. So the one at the visitor center was battery number 5 in that line, but you'd have another 50 of them built around Petersburg to protect it. So when the Union Army attacks here on June 15th of 1864, they end up breaking about a mile of that line that had been put here to defend Petersburg. And the only reason is because of the number of soldiers that are here. The Union Army attacks with 15,000 men that first day, and the Confederates have less than 2,500 to stop them. So no matter what the size of those earthworks were, there just weren't enough men. So the Confederates fall back. Now they're rallied that evening because Union forces don't follow them into Petersburg, and they're brought back out here. So as today, and you continue down the tour road, you come down this big hill at stop number 4 on the tour road, and there's a creek there called Harrison's Creek. The Confederates are brought back out of Petersburg after that first night of fighting, and they're told to dig in a new line of entrenchments. Earthen fortifications no more than waist high. Here on the western side of that creek bottom, so you have to go down the hill, across the creek, and then back up a little rise to get to where their new line is. And they start bringing in more troops as well. And more Union soldiers arrive also. And so for the next 2 days, June 16th and 17th in 1864, the fighting will take place right there along that creek line. But by the end of the 17th, there's now 70,000 Union soldiers here at Petersburg. Confederates have about 15,000. There's so many Union soldiers, they've literally overlapped Harrison's Creek. And so Confederate engineers try to find a place that they can defend Petersburg back from Harrison's Creek, and they come right here to this hillside where we're standing right now. This little ridge that ran right along the Griffith Farm connects into the bottom of Blandford Heights. And so it's here that engineers are going to put a series of stakes in the ground. And having fought for 2 days, Confederate soldiers on the night of the 17th are told to fall back here and build yet another line of protection for Petersburg. So this is the third line that they fought in. But now their back's against the wall. There is no fallback position from here back in closer to Petersburg. This is it. That's what they're told. And so here, where we're standing, was a salient. A salient was like a bubble. It stood out from where this main infantry trench would have been, which is right back behind you there. But here, in this bubble, it was named for the Confederate officer in charge. 33-year-old young man named was Stephen Elliott from down in South Carolina. Anybody who's been in the Marine Corps knows where Stephen Elliott is from, because he and his family had a plantation in Beaufort, North Carolina, or South Carolina, where Parris Island is. That's where he had grown up. Some people would say that's where they grew up. But Parris Island is where he comes from, and his claim to fame prior to being here at Petersburg is that he had been the commanding officer out in Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor for a couple of years at the beginning of the war. And now he finds himself with a brigade of South Carolina infantry here on this hillside, supporting 4 cannons manned by men from the city of Petersburg to stop the Union Army from taking the city. Now, they're not here isolated. This line continues on. There are North Carolinians and more cannons to the north of here. There's some Virginian brigade posted just to the south of here, and more guns along that line as well. And if we were here on June 18th of 1864, probably like Grant told you, the Union Army starts appearing on that far hillside. And the Confederates had left a small force there to oppose their advance, but they're forced back pretty quickly. Confederates will take up a position in that railroad cut, which was the Norfolk and Petersburg Railroad. It ran from here down to the coast in Norfolk. And so Confederates would be in that for a little bit of time before they're also overrun and forced to fall back here. And now Union troops make it as far up the hillside as where that high piece of grass that you can see, not 75 yards distant from where we are. And it's there that they start digging in. Now, imagining the heat, the struggle they've been through, the fighting and the constant pressure that these guys are under. 4 cannons, all the infantry here at the top of the hill, that whenever you show yourself, you're instantly drawing fire. Because of the terrain that you've already walked this morning, you can understand how the Union Army couldn't get artillery into that position. So the main Union line is built back on the hillside near the Taylor farm. And so the cannons that are posted there are going to always duel with the cannons that are posted here. And so there's constantly artillery shells flying up and over these poor guys here at the bottom of the hill. Now, everybody falls back to what their idea of home is. For some of these guys right down here, their idea of home had been Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania. For some of them, they had grown up working in coal mines. And when you're stuck on this hillside and you're pinned down by guys less than 100 yards or more away from you, it's natural to think that they come up with the idea of digging a mine. Digging a mine that runs from behind their works underneath of this Confederate fort, with the idea that if we blow this up and it's no longer there, we can simply walk right through into Petersburg. And that's exactly what they do. over the course of a month, from June 25th in 1864 to July 28th, they're going to dig a 511-foot tunnel. When it gets here to the end, what they assume to be the fort, they dig 40-foot lateral galleries in either direction. And then into that, they're going to pack 4 tons, 8,000 pounds powder, before then bringing dirt back into the mine and tamping this into the mine shaft, so the force of the blast is all directed up and underneath of that fort. Now, if you're a Confederate here, you really don't know what's going on, but they have a lot of telltale signs that they think there's something going on. There had been a young Confederate officer out here at the end of June, and he had been educated at the United States Military Academy at West Point. But he had grown up in Georgia. So at the time in school, he had gone back and forth. And he's an engineer in the United States Army prior to the Civil War, and so he realizes that in this country, you've got some really state-of-the-art mining going on, and when he gets here to inspect the artillery that's posted here, he looks down and he sees Pennsylvania battle flags. He makes the comment, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if some of those guys hadn't been miners in Pennsylvania prior to the war. And so with that, the Confederates send out their first detachment of counterminers. Now, if you look at me, you can tell I probably wouldn't have made a good soldier in the Civil War. But at the same time, if I had my choice, I'd probably choose countermining, because that's not bad work. Counterminers are sent out here, and it's usually a detachment of 4 or 5 guys. And so the first thing they do is dig a hole down in the ground, about 10 feet. And then they dig galleries in either direction out from that. And then they go down into those galleries and they take with them an auger, or just the ramrod from a musket and a hammer, and they sit and they listen. They listen for the sound of digging. Right over my shoulder, that hole in the ground underneath of that big tree limb, is a Confederate countermine. We're standing right here on top of the mine, and yet they never detected a thing. Now this is where our tour starts to move. We're going to make our way on around here, and unfortunately, we're going to be out of the shade for part of it. So join me on around here. If you had been standing here 157 years ago at 4:44 in the morning, in case you're wondering, that would have been 5:44 this morning because they didn't have daylight savings time. But if you were here at 4:44 on the morning of July 30th, 1864, they say the ground started to tremble and to shake. And pretty soon, fissures and cracks started to appear. And then smoke and flames started coming from those cracks in the ground. And then pretty soon, the tops of this hillside literally lift up out of the ground with a huge roar and explosion. Columns of flame fly up in the air before all the debris that had been here starts to fall back down. A hole is torn in the Confederate line from where that cannon is over to your left to where that cannon sits behind you there to my right. Almost 170 feet of the Confederate fortifications through here had been blown up, about 70 feet across and 20 to 30 feet down to the bottom. Some talk about it being lifted up almost like the lid of a jar because the sides of the hole were almost straight down and sheer, just because of the density of the clay that's here that makes up this part of the soil. Probably, estimates vary, but over 270 Confederate soldiers from South Carolina are consumed by the explosion, just cease to exist. 19 artillerists, men from Petersburg, Virginia, are also lost in the explosion. And so for them, this battle is over. But for everybody else, this battle is just getting underway. On the heels of this explosion, if that hadn't been enough to wake up everybody in this area, there are now more than 160 artillery pieces in the Federal lines that have all been told at the sound of this explosion to open fire on the Confederates in front of them to hold them in place. And so 110 cannons, more than 50 mortars are all now shelling this area of the Confederate line. And on the heels of that, just like for those of you that were on the earlier tour, young men start coming up out of that bottom and making their way here towards this exploded opening in the Confederate line. Their hope is that they can make their way through here and get onto Blandford Heights, and by that afternoon, Petersburg is in their hands, and this fighting at Petersburg is over. But unfortunately for those men, and many others that will be here, that's not the case. Union soldiers will continue to come up this hill, and as they get here, they're going to find themselves embroiled in a battle, which we know as the Battle of the Crater. Let's make our way right on around here. Now, of course, after this explosion, after the artillery barrage that's now plastering this hillside, the Confederates that are up here are all going to, of course, be awakened by everything that's going on. And not all of General Elliott's men had been posted in the fort that morning. He has men that are in the lines here to the north. He has another regiment down to the south of here. And he has a number of men that are back here behind the lines in their camps. Also back here is the bomb proofs that most of these guys over the month and a half that they've been here have learned is where you can seek some bit of safety. And so soldiers here in the front lines have learned that if you take all these boxes that everything's delivered to you, be it ammunition, be it food, and you take them apart, you build together what some men describe as your own coffin, and then cover it with dirt. When the artillery shells start flying back and forth, that's where you go for safety. And so literally, if you look at photographs from here after the war, it looks almost like a gopher village, because these little pockets of dirt are everywhere back through here. And then, you know, you can see from the lay of the land, without these trees down here, it's just barren and wide open. So General Elliott, realizing that a large portion of his men are now gone, and more importantly, this defensive line for Petersburg has a hole in it, starts forming up his men back here in this swale. And it's not long that by 5 o'clock, Union soldiers are now up this hillside. And for the first lead elements, they've come up and through the crater, and they actually find themselves here on this side. And they walk into the waiting fire of those South Carolinians. And so for most of these veteran soldiers, the one thing they've learned is that when you're being shot at, the safest place to be, on the ground. And that's where leadership and courage come in. You know, for what's missing from a lot of accounts from here is that the toll, not just from this fight, but the fights that lead up to this, had been enormous. The Union Army, just to get here to Petersburg, has lost 55,000 men from beginning of May until the middle of June when they arrive here. And then the first 4 days of fighting here in June, it cost them 10,000 more casualties. A large number of which are the junior officers and the NCOs that are right up at the front leading these attacks. And so the Army's replaced those men in name, but the leadership that's been lost by all that can't be replaced. And so now when you get here on July 30th in 1864 and you realize that these young officers and these people that I don't really know or trust are telling me to move forward into the waiting fire of Confederates, I'm going to take my chances right here on the ground where I am. And so instead of opening a roadway into Petersburg, it sets up kind of a roadblock. The Virginians to the south of here start pouring fire because these lines are built and constructed to a point where you can have interlocking fields of fire. And so you're not firing directly in front of you, but you're firing at an angle as more and more Union soldiers come up the hill. If you're here to the north and you're in the North Carolina Brigade that's up here, you're now firing at an angle at these Union troops that are coming up the hillside. If you've seen the beginning of the movie Coal Mountain, that's where Inman would have been, right up there, headed in this direction at the sound of this explosion and battle. And so now the focus of all the fighting turns to be right here at the top of the hill. but there aren't a lot of Confederate soldiers to hold back what is now almost 12,000 Union soldiers that are pouring up this hillside. Some are going to give full credit that this battle ends in the way it does to the Confederate artillery that's here. There are Confederate artillerists in the lines that haven't been blown up to the south of here. There are some guns here to the north and on the base of Blandford Heights. There's a battery back there next to that roadway. And there's also a battery here of men who have Coehorn mortars. They are led by a young officer from South Carolina who's 22 years old. He had lost an arm 2 years before this at the Battle of Gaines Mill outside of Richmond. But he's returned to service and he now commands this artillery that's here. After the war, he's going to write about this. And he has a number of things to say instead, including, we stood where we were until midday, firing on the enemy from our position along the plank road, right out there, and on either side of that part of the lines, which were now held by the enemy. Just by sheer number, Union forces have taken about 100 yards of the lines to the south of here, almost 200 yards, almost over to where you can see those tall trees at the other side of this cutover. This is all now Union soldiers here in what had been the Confederate protective line of Petersburg. John Haskell goes on to say, a battery of my battalion, commanded by Captain Lampkin, had some mortars on the plank road and did some wonderful work in demoralizing and damaging the enemy at a distance of only a few hundred yards. The mortars quickly had the range and with great accuracy dropped shell after shell among the enemy, and taking any fight that they may have had in them out of them pretty thoroughly. Again, these Union soldiers with very little leadership, with very little motivation in the summer of 1864 to go into battle with these Confederates that are here protecting Petersburg, are stalled right here along the top of the hill. Now, at the time, it's almost 8 o'clock in the morning. Union soldiers have been up this hillside now for almost 3 hours. All three of Burnside's veteran divisions have been committed to the battle itself. And he's left with just one division of soldiers to put into battle, and that's Ferrero's division of USCTs, United States Colored Troops. And as you walk their movement this morning from the south side of the battlefield up to the north side of the battlefield, they're directed to move directly against Blandford Heights. And so the fate of Petersburg literally hangs in the balance. John Haskell, the artillerist, says there's probably no way at this point that we're going to be able to preserve Petersburg. But the Confederates are doing everything in their power to make sure that they do. Now this begins their odyssey, and I would like to give a plug, even though none of them are here, but Grant did some of the weed eating down at the bottom of the hill, but our maintenance guys came out here, and these paths that we're about to walk that have been mowed, trust me, you're much better off with them being mowed than walking across these fields, because everyone would come out of here itching with chiggers and ticks and everything else that goes along with it. So please follow me down here to the bottom of the hill where we'll continue our story. When he arrives here on the battlefield that morning, he comes personally to the front, and he meets a Confederate soldier who's fleeing to the rear in panic, and that soldier tells him, "General, hell is busted back there." And so Mahone moves forward and he starts looking, and he sees all of these Union flags that are now waving in what would have been the Confederate line. He is going to bring his 1st brigade of soldiers, a brigade of Virginians, out from the base of Blandford, and he's going to place them in a line. It's going to be almost 200 yards long, right along the base of this bottom that we're in right now, back to Blandford Heights, where they'd come out into this little swale. And it's there that Mahone is made a speech. Unfortunately, he doesn't write about it. There are 3 or 4 different accounts of what he actually says, but most generally agree with the following. Mahone's speech is said to have said, "The enemy have our works. The line of men which we have here is the only barrier to the enemies occupying the city of Petersburg. There is nothing to resist his advance. Upon us devolves the duty of driving from his strong position in our front and reestablishing the Confederate lines. We must carry his position immediately by assaulting it. If we don't carry it by the first attack, we will renew the attack as long as there is a man of us left or until the works are ours. Much depends upon our prompt, vigorous, simultaneous movements. And so Colonel William Stewart of the 61st Virginia, which is part of that brigade, says the report from the men passing us was that the first intimidation that we would have to fight Negroes. And it seemed to infuse our little band with impetuous daring, as if pressed forward to the fray. I never felt more like fighting in my life. Our comrades had been slaughtered in a most inhumane and brutal manner, and black slaves were trampling over their mangled and bleeding forms. Revenge must have fired every heart and strung every arm with nerves of steel for the Herculean task of blood. General Mahone had grown up in Southampton County. When he was 4.5 years old, Nat Turner, a slave, had led a rebellion and insurrection. And he had killed more than 50 white people, mostly in their sleep, many of them women and children. And those stories from that insurrection in 1831 still permeated the stories of this area. Another one of the regiments that's in that 1st Brigade of Virginians that come out here is the 12th Virginia Infantry. It had been raised solely from the citizens of Petersburg. And now they're being told they're all that stands in the advance of the Union Army towards their homes. And fueled by stories like Turner's Rebellion, now these young men are facing almost 4,000 armed black men that are coming towards them yelling, "Remember Fort Pillow, take no prisoners, give no quarter." All of those emotions from everybody on this battlefield, no matter what their conception of home or duty or courage or leadership or valor, whatever is motivating a young man on this battlefield, it's all going to meet right here on this hillside behind you. By 9 o'clock, the Virginians are going to begin their assault. They're going to head up the hillside, and one of the officers from the 6th Virginia would later write about this, saying, "We fixed bayonets in a strong double quick. They sprang from the ravine and rushed upon the foe that now packed our trenches. Nor was a shot fired until we hit the line. During the preceding years of the bloody war, it was the first time I had ever seen or ordered the bayonet to be used. To think of it makes me recoil even now." Confederates had been told it was about 100 yards before they reached the Union troops. But in actuality, it's going to be almost 200 yards. And having marched 2 miles to get here and then made that rush up the hill, it's going to come at a hard price. Out of the Virginia Brigade alone, 94 men will be killed, 159 wounded, and 14 captured. 267 of less than 800 men in that brigade lost trying to protect their homes or their sense of what home was. Shortly after, more of their brigade or division will join them with a brigade of Georgians. By the time they get here, that number overlaps this, and rather than putting them out here in the open, Mahone's going to send them regiment by regiment against the Union troops at the top of the hill. And the first charge they make is repulsed by Union soldiers that have captured this northern portion of the line. But after their second charge, along with the remnants of the Virginians, they end up forcing most of the Union troops that are here to the north of the crater, back right around that centered top of the hill where the explosion had taken place that morning. It's now after 11 o'clock. Union troops at the top of the hill have now been there for 6 hours. It's as hot that day as it is today. Soldiers carry with them into combat 40 rounds of ammunition, a canteen of water. So you can only imagine what it's like for these guys to get here and then have to rush into this battle and battle the elements along with it. Let's move right up ahead of us here. 2 of the 3 brigades that he brought here to this battlefield has already seen his Virginians and his Georgians charge up the hillside. They've stymied the Union assault, but at the same time, this battlefield is still up for grabs. There's still thousands of Union soldiers holding the Confederate main line at the top of the hill. Colonel Haskell, the artillerist, says that Mahone directed me to bring up some of my light mortars, which could be carried by the men to a point near the crater. And with the protection of his men, and with these to keep up a rapid fire, we got closer and closer to the enemy until we were throwing shells with such light charges of powder that they would rise so slowly as to look as if they could not get to the enemy, who were so close that we could hear them cry out when the shells would fall among them. And repeatedly they would dash out and beg to surrender. On the heels of that, the Brigade of Alabamians is brought into line where we're standing right now. There are going to be 4 more regiments of soldiers that come out here. And for those young men who have seen the other remnants of the Confederate assaults made by Mahone's men that are now laying back down here with the wounded, the 630 Alabamians that are here at 1 o'clock in the afternoon are told that they're going to now charge up this hillside. They've marched over a mile to get here. They find themselves here as literally the last of the Confederate reinforcements tasked with preserving Petersburg. It's going to be here that Captain Featherston of the 9th Alabama says, "Soon we saw the flash of the sunlight on the enemy's guns and bayonets as they leveled them over the walls of the fort. Then a sheet of flame flashed out as they fired, and this volley seemed to awaken the demons of hell. They gave the rebel yell and charged through the Federal artillery shells and into the jaws of death and into the mouth of hell as they start making their way up this hillside." Colonel Haskell says Mahone has ordered his final in charge, which will end up taking the entire line. And so we're going to march with the Alabamians from here up to where the last of their fight will take place. We'll just go ahead and enjoy the breeze for a little bit and finish up with what takes place here at the top of the hill. Now, you've just followed in the footsteps of over 600 soldiers making their way here. And when they get to right around this area that we're in, it says that we fell behind a 12-foot high border of clay around the crater. All of that clay, all of that debris from this morning's blast has now lumped up around the edge of that exploded opening in the Confederate line. And so now there's descriptions of these huge hunks of clay that literally the only thing that separates one side from the other. And so Union troops over inside are making use of the cover, as are the Alabamians as they're moving forward. One Alabamian said that clay was the only thing that separated many from life and death. Colonel Haskell once again says, our men, remembering that hundreds of their fellows were perhaps only then smothering under the piled up dirt, were utterly frenzied with rage. Nothing in the war could have exceeded the horrors that followed. No quarter was given, and for what seemed like a long time, fearful butchery was carried on. These soldiers have fought each other for several years just getting here to Petersburg. Now they find themselves on this battlefield. And again, whatever notion of home that you carry with you into this battle is now all coming into fruition here around the top of this hill at almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Having been up here now for over 9 hours, federal troops are still gathered right here where the exploded opening had been that morning. And now these Confederate soldiers that have arrived here to stop that have really moved right up on top of them. And they've arrested their advance, consolidated them into this one area. And it's here that they are going to end up fighting out the final scenes of this battle, as Grant told you earlier, an almost hand-to-hand conflict. The Alabamians are going to use the old ruse of putting their hats on top of their ramrods and sticking them up in the air. And the Union troops inside fire a volley at what they think is the heads of those soldiers, at which point the Alabamians spring their final charge. Haskell's mortars are up here, and they're pouring fire, using what he describes as almost a squib to shoot their exploding shells into the mass of Union soldiers that are up here. Confederates that aren't going straight in are picking up muskets that are here on the ground, and if they have a bayonet fixed to them, they're literally tossing them up in the air to have them hurl down like a spear into the packed mass that's here below them. They say that the cries for pity and quarter are coming from everywhere. Union troops are building walls out of their fallen comrades to get behind and use as cover. As more and more Confederates reach here and start jumping over in and literally fighting each other almost like inhuman beasts, bayoneting one another, turning their muskets and using them like clubs. Both sides going hand to hand for almost 45 minutes inside of this open ground. Many of the Confederate soldiers that are seen not taking prisoners and killing black troops, especially when they find them, are ordered by General Mahone to stop. And one soldier's response to General Mahone was, "They were giving us no quarter this morning. We're not going to give them any now." And so as prisoners are being brought out of the crater, many, because of the color of their skin, are shot right out here on their way to the rear. Inside the crater, some of the officers of the USCT units are said to appear without any trimmings of their rank, because most didn't want to be captured as officers of black troops, for fear that they also would be killed in retaliation. And then there are scenes of Union soldiers killing their fellow comrades because of the color of their skin, so they wouldn't be captured with them. And then word reaches here to fall back to the safety of their lines down at the bottom of the hill. But by that time, all the Confederate firepower, all of the artillery, is all going to have a free open area as a firing range as they're falling back. And so hundreds more will fall, or are forced with the idea or notion that, do I escape or do I just give up right here? And hundreds will. At the end of the tally that day, there's going to be 504 Union soldiers reportedly killed in this battle. 1,881 will have wounds, and 1,413 will have been captured by the Confederates. The Confederates don't break down their casualties, but they had over 1,600 killed, wounded, and captured in the same fight. And that, I would argue, really just begins the horror here. Because as nightfall finally comes to the battlefield, Union troops are back down in their trenches, and the Confederates are here at the top of the hill. The next morning, when the sun comes up on July 31st, the first thing you probably would have seen from here at the top of the hill were flags of truce from the Union lines. But the Confederates here at the top of the hill belong to several different commands, and until they can figure out what the command structure is, they can't honor any of those flags of truce. And so the wounded that are now laying out in the July sun between the lines will all start to expire. Finally decided on July 31st that they will honor a flag of truce, but it won't be until the next morning, on August the 1st. And so as Union troops advance from their position over a day later, they'll find many of their comrades dead, baking in the Virginia sun. At the same time, this area would have looked different. Some people, when they get here, seem to be somewhat disappointed by the size of this hole that they see and all the tremendous things that they've heard about this battle and how horrible it was. And then to find this small little opening, well, it would have looked different 24 hours later, because the Confederates have taken some of their prisoners of war and had them bury their comrades where they lay down in the base of it. Over 200 Union soldiers will be buried where the explosion had taken place. And then, because of the importance of this position, they will have them reconstruct the fort right on top of that mass grave. And so had you been here 157 years and one day later, it wouldn't have looked the same as these descriptions that I've told you and Grant told you this morning. But that notion of home, that notion of leadership and courage, it's all taken many different forms here, for the most part is attributed to this Confederate victory to the monument that are behind you. It's the largest and one of the few Confederate monuments. It'll be to a man who had been here before the war, made his contribution to the area, fight for the preservation of the city during the war, and then returns here after the war and makes even more of a considerable type of gesture towards Petersburg. He will come back here and he will set up a railroad that eventually today you will know as the Norfolk Southern Corporation. And because of some of the money he makes, he will end up, having been here on this battlefield and witnessed the things that you've seen, being a primary responsible person for starting what today is a historically black college and university here in Petersburg that's now known as Virginia State University. But his monument lingers here on the battlefield, and after his death many years later, he has his remains brought back to Blandford Cemetery and placed in a mausoleum there among his men who fought to preserve what was their idea of home. Thank you all for coming out and joining us for the anniversary. Again, we appreciate that you took time out of your day to witness part of what took place here. And if you have questions about anything along the way, be glad to help you with those also. Thank you.
Thank you so much.